Good evening, Madam Mayor, City Council. I am pleased to present the 2012 City of Moscow Citizen Survey results this evening. As you all know, this is our 6th biennial citizen survey. We do this process. We go through this every 2 years. It's an biennial survey. We conduct it typically in September and October of each year. It's intended to assess an overall quality of life and to assess city services as well. We divide our city into 7 geographic sectors, and the people that are surveyed are all within the city limits. How we conduct this is we do a direct mailed survey to 1,200 households within the city limits. We take any P.O. boxes, dormitories, those types of things out. They have to be residential addresses within the city. That pre-survey announcement postcard is sent, letting people know that they'll be getting that survey tool, which consists of an 8-page survey, a cover letter from the mayor, and a return envelope to send that back to us. And before I get too much further, I'd like to thank also Bill Belknap, and I think it's Brant Cusera, who did the first 3 surveys. This is the 3rd survey I've had the pleasure of working on. Our methodology, we use the 5-point Likert scale as often as we can. That provides us a range of responses from, for instance, strongly agree, agree, neutral, disagree, and strongly disagree, so we can get a range of opinions on that matter. The report's organized and includes standard city questions, which have been asked on nearly every citizen survey to date. It includes demographic questions, so we can compare that with our census and make sure we're getting a strong representative sample. And also includes open-ended questions and our commission and task force questions as well. Those will change from survey to survey depending on the commission's preference. This survey, we received a 33% response rate, which is a great response rate for a survey of this type. We've typically been in the low 30s, and this actually is 2 percentage points above last survey's response rate. We did do a little bit of adjusting with the survey tool itself. It's always been 8 pages, at least in recent years. And we've allowed anywhere from 2 to 4 questions per commission. This year we limited that to 2 because the survey was getting very dense and had a lot of questions, a lot of items per page, even though we were able to keep it down to that 8-page minimum. 387 surveys were completed and returned. In addition, we had 34 surveys that were returned to us as non-deliverable, making for that 33% response rate. Our demographics are 60% female, 37% male, 37% have a 20-plus year, are 20-plus year residents, 65% have a bachelor's or a higher degree, and then 91% of our respondents were Caucasian, and we check that with the census again to make sure we're getting that representative sample. Now this graph I'm showing here is it's not extremely interesting, but it shows some really good things when we talk about the consistency of the surveys over the year. It doesn't give us a good idea of, what's entirely there, but it shows that things have been, specifically when you look at overall quality of life, Moscow is a place to live, overall quality of neighborhood. These things have been consistent for the 6 years, and their scores have been in the 80-point range. And that 80-point range is depicted in the 100-point scale that we use when converting our percentage points to kind of a more comparable scale. That scale of 1 to 100 is significant because if you look at about a 70 on that scale, that's good. So when we're looking at 80s across the board for overall quality of life and other items, that's very good to see. In addition, 94% of respondents stated that the overall quality of life in Moscow was excellent or very good, and that's a number that we've seen consistently over the years as well. Another item of note on this particular slide is Moscow as a place to raise children. You'll remember, I think it was December of 2012, we were again noted as the best city in the state to raise kids here in Idaho. That survey rates public school performance, safety, housing costs, commute time, poverty, adults' educational attainment, share of households with children, and diversity. And our scores, I think, reflect that award that honor that we received. When we look at crimes and safety, there's some significant trends here as well. Things have stayed fairly steady over the 6 surveys. People, first and foremost, feel most safe from violent crimes, then fires, then property crimes. And that property crimes average is about 76 over the years. So the table there just depicts all 6 surveys worth of data. Again, you're seeing some very similar numbers again and again, and all above that 70 range, which we like to see. We also ask our respondents to rate 9 items. We ask them to rate these on a scale of major problem, minor problem, not a problem, so on and so forth. And I will have to make a note, in the draft survey you received in your packets, I flip-flopped 2 of our items. Taxes and growth are the 2 things that we've seen the most movement on. And specifically, taxes were noted as less of an issue. They are, in fact, more of an issue by 5 points when comparing 2010 to 2012. And then growth in the draft you have there says it was perceived as more of a problem. It is, in fact, less of a problem when comparing 2010 to 2012.
Madam Mayor, if I may ask a question. Higher is more or less?
Higher is less of a problem.
Okay.
The bigger the number there, the less of a problem it is, which is why I need to probably find a better way to report that out to make sure it's clear.
Okay, but higher is
We're counting
less of a problem.
Correct. We're counting the number of respondents who say it is not a problem, or a minor problem here.
Okay, thank you.
2 items have always on these surveys received a high non-response rate, and I should have spoken to that earlier. In instances where we have had respondents either not answer a question or choose don't know, we make an adjustment to not include those responses so that we're getting a good representation of opinions considering that smaller sample size for that particular question. When you see asterisks throughout the report or in this presentation, that's where we had a very high non-response rate or a don't know rate. And so technically our sample size for those particular items are smaller, and we make a note of that because they could be less reliable. For this drug abuse and domestic violence, they've been mid 30%, in the non-response rate. Which is it's the highest non-response rate we have in the entire survey, but it's also down from the 40s. So I think we're still getting a good read on some of these things. I spoke to growth a minute ago, noting that respondents are saying growth is actually less of a problem by 5 points. And that's reflected in the question, the city does a good job of planning for the growth of our community. This score has been on the upswing since 2006, and we've seen just this year a 4-point difference when looking at that 100-point scale when asked to rate this particular item on the survey. Looking at all of the city services, this is just as about as interesting as that first graph I showed, but again shows some amazing trends. All of the items on here, with the exception of 2, are within 1 to 3 points of previous surveys. And when we're looking at the data, we'll typically look at anything that's 4 to 5 points out of or different from the previous year. In this instance, recreation facilities and planning and zoning were the only two that stood out. Recreation facilities are down by about 5 points in 2012 when compared to 10, and planning and zoning rose by 5 points when looking at 10 to 12, which I think ties into those growth questions as well. We do have one item on here that wasn't asked in 2002. That's handicap accessibility in public places. You'll see the caret symbol there noting that. This particular item is shown a little bit differently.
Jen, on that,
yes.
Can you go back to that previous slide? And speaking of the handicapped accessibility, that looks like it dropped from 67 to 64. It looks like it's on the downslope. Is there any speculation? Since we did the mobility task force, we did the hot spots, we received a significant amount of money for the curb drops and all of that.
The city staff has not speculated at this point, but that's because it's not more than 3 points from year to year. It's something that we will continue to watch, though, and we need to keep an eye on that item as we move forward in the future.
Thank you.
When asked to rate facilities, services, and activities, these were reported, as I mentioned, in a different way. We converted this to a modified 100-point scale to weight answers and kind of get a picture from year to year. There's about 4 things that I think stood out in this particular instance. Recycling, as a matter of fact, has increased from 72 to 78. City parks, visits to city parks has gone up from 48 to 53. We've seen a slight drop in the Moscow Public Library or services, folks using that from 41 to 34. And we've seen a pretty sizable increase in the 1912 Center use from a rating on a 13 to a 22. This isn't technically a rating of use or how much a person likes the facility or service. It's just
But But yet the 1912 dropped. Thank you, ma'am.
So, I'm saying from the lowest point to the
10
highest
and
point.
I understand, but from 10 to 12, it dropped slightly.
Slightly.
But again, like the mayor's former question is, you need a Ouija board to figure out the why, probably.
It's, again, all of these things we can continue to track and look for significant trends over time.
Well, and you look at the 1912, it made a pretty
tremendous
good jump there. So, yeah, considering how flat it was, big jump.
If I may.
Please.
For attending an event at the 1912 Center, that can also be if you're looking at perhaps recession, people not being able to rent it, not having the money to rent it, not having as many weddings or whatever. It's just my Ouija board.
It may be a product of offerings
That's
as
my-
opposed to people being interested to go.
Yeah, right.
That's true. So all of our Ouija boards are,
They're all.
thank you.
Everybody guess.
And another thing that we do on occasion is when we apply a trend line to any particular set of data, to see if it's typically increasing or decreasing, and if those ups and downs along the way are indicative of the actual underlying pattern there. Looking at those overall quality of services, again, our 2012 score was 72 with a historical average of 71, and that's looking at that previous table that we didn't see much movement in slide before last. Respondents are also asked to measure the value of services. That would be the value they provide considering the amount of money paid for the services is how the question is answered. All scores for this item in this category were consistent with previous years again, with the exception of water services is our one interesting piece here. In 2002 was rated a 69. Since that time has been around an average of, or in the low 60s since that time. So we'll continue to watch it, but that 2002 may have been an anomaly.
Does anyone remember when the tiered rate structure went in for water?
6.
Gary, do you remember that?
We did the rate-
2005 or 6?
Yeah, we did the rate study in 2005, implemented it in 2006, I believe.
So there's no real impact on the survey from the tiered rate structure? Does not appear to be.
Not significant.
I was going to explain the 69 to 59, but that doesn't work.
Interaction with city government. This is a question where you try to find out how people are contacting us. One of the items that was added this year was asking a person to rate how often they watched a city council meeting on TV. It's a pie chart to your right. When we look at the types of interaction, though, starting with that, all of these items were varied by 3 points or less when looking at the previous year, except for 2. 2. The frequency for which respondents read a legal notice in the newspaper has dropped since 2002 by 7 points, and the frequency for which folks attend a city committee or commission meeting has dropped by 4 points. That watched a city council meeting on TV, when we apply the number of respondents, Councilmember Steed asked me to look at these numbers. I can give a kind of a brief picture kind of in the numbers versus the percentages. So folks that have watched city council meetings 26 times or more, looking at our 387 respondents, that would be about 8 people.
How many?
8 out of just the respondents. There are 387.
But can it, if I may, can it be projected to the larger number of the population?
I think we could loosely project it. My concern is those people who have, for instance, the dish networks or some of those other cable providers that don't even have access to the channel or have chosen not to. I don't have access to that data, so I don't know what the percentage or what the total group would be to take the percentage from without further review.
And just to clarify, if we ask the question, did you watch it on TV, and they watched it on their, iPad or something like that, and especially people like, and I'm obligated to watch it on my computer because of having satellite. So I think that is a questionably valid kind of question as it's posed.
Yeah.
I would suspect my wife would answer that affirmatively because she watches it on a computer. But my point is, if this is a statistically valid survey of the entire population of the city of Moscow, could not this data be projected to the entire population? And I took stat in college and was very lucky to get out of it. So I'm a little out of my depth here, and that was a long time ago.
And like I said, I think it could loosely be applied to the population, but we just need to keep in mind those several factors there.
Right.